There will always be a world policeman. The U.S. is the world policeman, sure, but there will always be a world policeman. And why do I say that? Because, my friends, there always has been a world policeman. Now, back once upon a time when men were men and women were glad of it, the world was much smaller. It was regional, and we had regional policemen. Okay, we didn't have a world policeman, but every little region had their policemen in different times in history, in different snapshots in history. Genghis Khan and the Mongols, okay, they went well into Eastern Europe. The Holy Roman Empire, holy mackerel, they took over all of Europe, much of Asia, the whole Middle East, the populated part of Africa, once upon a time. The Ottoman Empire, which is modern-day Turkey, they ruled that whole Middle East region, North Africa, all the way into Spain. There are mosques right now to this day in Spain that were built by the Ottomans, okay? The Persians, the Iranians, if you would, the Persians and the Pashas who ran Persia for many years, they ruled that part of the world for many years. The British Empire, up until fairly recently, rule Britannia, Britannia rules the waves. The sun never sets on the British Empire and never comes up in London, okay? Never comes out in London, I should say. The British ruled most of the world once upon a time. Before the British, it was the Spanish and the Spanish Armada, because the Spanish had the strongest navy in the world once upon a time, until the British circumvented it by building bigger and better ships, and they trashed the Spanish Armada, and they took over world domination. The Greeks, in the days of the Parthenon, ruled that part of the world. Even the French, Napoleon, ruled much of Europe for a short period of time. The Vikings, I could go on and on and on. Rarely, if ever, have any people simply let others live their lives as they please without wanting to intervene. That's never happened anywhere in society that I've seen documented. Now, maybe once upon a time, there were a group of indigenous people who lived in some river valley someplace who did that, okay? I think that's just something that was written in a storybook, or maybe you saw as a subplot for some video game. But for the most part, friends, that's never happened in the world for any length of time, okay? It's just human nature for people to want to intervene in the lives and actions of others. And in the past, it's been whoever has the biggest army. The biggest army wins. My 1,000,000 troops will kill your 500,000 troops, okay? Because we just have more people. That was back in the days when we fought one another with clubs and swords, okay? Maybe you had a bigger sword, maybe a stronger club, but still, the biggest army always wins. In addition to that, the best fed, stronger army always won, which is why the Vikings were able to beat the indigenous people of England, because the Vikings ate meat and the indigenous people in England ate roots, okay? They were stronger. They were better. They were better fed. In fact, if you look through history, a couple winters ago, I read several books on Ulysses S. Grant. And was he a great general? Yes. And you always hear that Grant was a great general, but Lee was a better strategic general than Grant, which everything that I've read is true. But here's why Grant won. Before he was general of the U.S. armies, he was a supply officer. In other words, Grant's job was to supply troops with food and tents and water and clothing and ammunition. He was fantastic at that. And he made sure that his guys were fed, rested, watered, kept warm, and supplied with everything they need. Grant's troops ran around in the wintertime with bare feet, no coat, and had to hunt for squirrels in the woods to eat, okay? That's one of the big reasons why Grant was a better general than Lee, okay? But the best fed armies are always the best. Later on, the best equipped armies won. Again, I said this before, but the whole song, Rule Britannia, Britannia rules the waves. In other words, they had the best navy. Because England, Britain, had the best navy, that's how a small island ruled so much of the world, basically until the 1960s, when colonialism was phased out for other reasons. Taking the world by force really doesn't happen anymore, however, at least in the first world. It just doesn't happen. It hasn't happened since Nazi Germany in World War II. Not in the first world. Not really in the second world. Still happens in the third world, but the first and second world, not so much. Now, let me digress just a little bit here. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, I'm going to define first world, second world, and third world, because you've probably heard those terms, but don't know what they are. In fact, you've probably heard the term first world, that's us, and third world, that's the starving children in Africa that you see with the bowl of porridge and the flies all over them, and the propagation for the Society for the Propagation of the Faith magazines that the Catholic Church sends out. But actually, the first world is the United States and all of our allies. United States, Canada, Western Europe, Japan, Australia, etc. That's the first world. Second world are the old Soviet bloc countries and China. Communism, basically. The communist bloc. China, Russia, the Russian satellites in the east. Those were the second world countries. It's still second world, but there's no formal Soviet Union anymore, although the Chinese communists are still communist. Okay, that's the second world. The third world, everybody else. And it's not necessarily poor countries. It's just countries that aren't aligned with other people, okay? And in the third world, they still fight those types of armies, but not in the first world, not in the second. The Nazis were really the last ones to try to overtake in the first world, to overtake the world by force, okay? Why does nobody do it anymore? I mean, we could. First world, if the United States decided they just wanted to take over Bolivia, there's nothing Bolivia could do. But winning the war is not the problem. It's winning the peace that's always been the problem. It's not sustainable. I mean, even if you can take it, you can't hold it. So it's kind of a deal where first and second world countries don't fight these types of wars, because once they win them, now what do? They can't sustain them. You can't kill everybody who disagrees with you. Territory is now taken by persuasion, okay? And it's money. Money is what persuades people to be your ally, to let you do things. The United States, Russia, and China all do this. The United States, our NATO, if you would. I mean, we have, even in NATO, U.S. foots most of the bill, but the U.S. has bases in Europe, in Japan, Djibouti, the Balkans, etc. We have bases in many, many places. Why do we have bases there? Because a U.S. base means money for the area. Okay, even in Europe. I mean, so many times Europeans have said, well, we need to get these Americans out of here. We don't want these Americans in our country anymore. And we say, okay, fine, we'll pull out our base and we'll pull out our soldiers. So we will not maintain the roads anymore to drive our tanks on. The town that depends on the soldiers going there on weekends and after hours to have dinner and go to the bars, they're not going to go there anymore. The local businesses that supply just the basic foodstuffs and the basic needs for the base, that business is going to go away. They then back off, okay? So we are in countries, our bases are in countries for the most part because the people want us there. And a U.S. base means security and stability. And it's a whole lot like, let me use a scenario here. Why would a middle-aged man want to have a drama-ridden, big-titted young girlfriend, okay? Because it's worth it. Does he like the drama? No. Does he like the BS that goes with it? No. But to get this, he has to put up with that, okay? A better scenario, one we could probably relate to more, is you and your job. When you go to work on Monday morning, are you thinking, man, I can't wait to stop doing what I did on the weekend and go back to work? Almost nobody thinks that. But you go to your job because, you know what, you go there, you do your thing, the man pays you some money, and then you go out and do the stuff that lets you have fun on the weekends, okay? Now, if you do this, I get that. If I do this work for the boss, he's going to pay me that, and I can then live my life the way I want, okay? That's why we have bases everywhere. The people may say they don't like it, but you know what? They're not asking us to leave, because when they do, we generally do leave, okay? The Philippines, they asked us to leave those Clark and Subic Bay airfields. They asked us to leave. We said, okay, and we did. So when they ask us to leave, we do, but they normally don't because they want us there. The security as well, okay? Because if there's a base, a U.S. Navy base in Djibouti, nobody is taking over that country. There is no chance of the Russians or the Chinese coming in and doing anything, or with the warlords in that part of the world taking over that part of the country, because they can't stand up to the U.S. military. So, money and security. The old Soviet bloc countries, Russia, they do the same thing. I mean, Russia recently just annexed the Crimea, part of the Ukraine. They didn't want it. The people in that little area actually did, because they were more affiliated with Russia than with Ukraine. But Ukraine couldn't do anything about it. They couldn't. They tried to kind of fight the Russians, but that was silly. They couldn't beat them, so Russia did what they wanted. Russia also rules the roost in Syria, in Iran. That's who basically backs Russia nowadays. In Cuba, in Venezuela, in Lebanon. They have bases in all those places, okay? Again, because they supply the money and security that enables those countries to do what they want to do. China, mainly Africa. China is huge in Africa nowadays. Now, they've not taken over the country with soldiers, but what they do is they build infrastructure. They build plants. They build bases. They lend these small African countries money. And then when they can't pay their bill, they say, okay, we understand you can't pay the bill. We'll just take this hunk of land here and build a base. And there's little that the country can do. They've recently done that with Kenya, by the way. Okay, so that's how first and second world countries build their bases now. Okay, they don't fight wars. The United States is not going to fight a war with Russia or China. That's not going to happen. Wars are now fought via proxy through third world militias, etc. Sometimes countries, the Kurds, Hezbollah, etc. That's who fights wars nowadays. Sure, U.S. troops, Russian troops, Chinese troops, they get involved in skirmishes. But for the most part, wars are fought via proxy. Everyone knows it goes on, but people are starting to catch on, and they're starting to protest. So hopefully this whole proxy war thing may go by the wayside, just like First World fighting First World has gone by the wayside. Maybe that'll happen. The future will let us know. But getting back to Iran, because that's what I want to focus on during this essay, is Iran. Iran, you can say whatever you want about Iran, okay? But the fact of the matter is Iran is a dictatorship. Okay, you'll say, well, no, that's not right, Strong, because they do have elections and the people can vote, which is true, by the way. So you can vote in Iran, but only some can run for office, okay? So it's not quite as bad as Russia, whereas there's one candidate, and it's the Communist Party, and if you don't vote for them, well, the other ones have been thrown in jail, so they can't really run. Iran's a little better than that, but not much. Basically, only some can run for elections, and all have to pay homage to the Ayatollah, because the real ruler of that country is the Ayatollah. He's the supreme leader. So think about this. Before you say, well, Iran's not that bad of a country, Strong, they're a freely elected country. No, they're ruled by a man who's religious, and he says it's okay for a man to have 3 9-year-old wives, okay? That's who runs Iran. It's against the law to proselytize any faith other than Islam in Iran. They will throw you in jail for that. So forget about Iran being a free country. It's just not. They have Russian backing, because while they have oil, they have big-time economic problems. For the most part, they've got so many sanctions against them that they can't really trade with the West. And the West has the money. Sure, they trade with Russia, but who cares? Russia doesn't have much more than Iran does, okay? They've got oil, but so does Iran. But with Russian backing, Iran now fights a war in Syria, and Hezbollah. Hezbollah is backed by Iran in Lebanon, and they have basically